You might have heard that all roads lead to Rome, but here in Japan, all roads lead to the Nihonbashi. Like the Romans, the Japanese also had milestones along their roads to mark the distance traveled, and they used this bridge as the point from which these distances were measured. The Nihonbashi was originally a simple wooden bridge as is depicted in Hiroshige's woodblock prints, but in 1911 the current stone and steel bridge designed by Tsumaki Yorinaka was built. Shortly before the 1964 Olympics, the Metropolitan Expressway was built above the Nihonbashi, obscuring the iconic view of Mount Fuji from the bridge. Because of the important status of the bridge, one of its lampposts was raised above the expressway so that at least part of the bridge would stand above it. Today, the significance of the bridge continues, as highway signs that show the distance to Tokyo are actually showing the distance to the bridge, specifically to this marker in the middle of the road. Fortunately, a replica is placed nearby so that passers-by don't have to risk their lives to get a good view of it. Tourists are also drawn to it, and many can be seen coming by boat up the river to view the bridge. The 5 great roads of the Tokaido all lead to this bridge and date back to the 17th century when the shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu moved his center of power to modern-day Tokyo, then known as Edo. In this time period, the shogun held effective power in the country, and the emperor back in Kyoto was nothing more than a figurehead. To better control the feudal lords or daimyo, the shogun ordered that they had to split their time between their domains and Edo. In addition, their families were forced to remain in Edo year-round as hostages. This allowed him to keep a better eye on them, but also forced them to spend vast amounts of money transporting themselves and their entourage back and forth between Edo and their homes. Spending money on their travels weakened the daimyo and made it so they had less money to devote to fighting amongst themselves or to rebel against the shogun. In order to facilitate this travel, the shogun had 5 great roads built to connect the various corners of Japan to a center of power. The most important of these roads was the Eastern Sea Road, or Tokaido, which went eastward from Kyoto to Edo. These roads were traveled not only by feudal lords, but also by merchants, pilgrims, and anyone else who needed to travel. Along the road were a series of post towns, or stations, where there were inns, shops, shrines, and temples, and also checkpoints and horse relay stations. There were 53 of these stations along the Tokaido, and it took travelers around 2 weeks to travel the roughly 500 kilometers to Kyoto, so each day they would pass through several stations. These stations were immortalized by the artist Utagawa Hiroshige with his 53 stations of the Tokaido. As Japan modernized in the 19th century, much of these roads were lost, but some portions remain as they were with their original stone paving. Today, a high-speed train line between Tokyo and Kyoto runs along the path of the old Tokaido. And here in Shinagawa, part of the old Tokaido still exists in an area which used to be the first town that travelers along this road would encounter. Today, the old post town of Shinagawa has since been absorbed into the sprawl of the modern Tokyo metropolis. And the coastline that we see in Hiroshige's print is no longer visible from the road due to land reclamation efforts in the 1960s that have since moved the shore of Tokyo Bay several hundred meters out. Though the ancient cobblestones are now gone or buried here, the road lives on in both name and fact, and the history of this road and those who traveled it can still be felt. Travelers walking along it today will see some of the same shrines and temples as those who walked along it 400 years earlier, though many structures had to be rebuilt following the destructive firebombing that Tokyo endured during World War II. And as there were back then, the current street is still full of shops and restaurants. The nature of the ancient road echoes in the name of a nearby train station along its path, which carries the name Shimbamba, or place where riders would change horses. In modern times, there are no more horses, but there's still a hotel in the area where travelers can rest as they would have centuries ago. Another nearby station is called Aomono Yokocho, or Greengrocer's Alley, where farmers in the area would bring fruits to sell in the market and where many inns along the Tokaido would provision themselves. As a nod to the important role of the area as a hub for farmers, the street lamps here are in the shape of peas in a pod. A little further down is the Samizu station, whose name references the nearby Samizu Hachiman Shrine, which was first mentioned in records dating back to 1668. Like many shrines and temples in Tokyo, the current structure was rebuilt after the war. This shrine building dates back to 1972. Though the original road in Tokyo has been lost to modernity, part of the original cobblestone road survives in the area around Hakone, known as the Hakone Hachiri. This 32-kilometer stretch was considered to be the most difficult part of the journey between the two cities due to the mountainous terrain. Somewhat exaggerated view of this part of the path can be seen in Hiroshige's print of Hakone, which is the 10th station along the path. Though the image presented isn't quite accurate of the reality, I can attest that it actually captures the feeling of traveling along the steep mountainous path.
A lot more vertical than I was expecting.
The Amazake Chaya, a 400-year-old tea house, still exists along this part of the road and still serves their traditional fermented rice drink called amazake. Visitors can also enjoy some omochi as well as some pickled vegetables. The tea house is accessible by car or by bus and is a convenient starting point for those who want to travel the short 2-kilometer portion of the road to Hakone and Lake Ashi. The cobblestones are slippery due to the humidity in the area, which contributes to the famous difficulty of the hike. Engraved stones can be seen along the road, as well as 400-year-old cedar trees planted on the orders of the shogun to provide shade in the summer and protection from the harsh wind and snow in winter. There are also signs warning of bears in the area, though they generally fear humans but can attack if startled, so it's best to speak a little and make some noise when walking along the road. Modern hikers can sometimes be seen with bells attached to their clothing to warn the bears of their presence. Not far from the tea house, the old Tokaido crosses a modern road, and once we cross, we see a sign that tells us how long before we get to Moto Hakone, which is the town that we'll be passing through before we get to Hakone. We also see a stone with a similar engraving, as well as one indicating that this is the famous White Water Slope, or Shiro Mizuzaka, which is one of the harder stretches of the hike. A little further along the road, and we begin to see the outskirts of Moto Hakone. Here, we see a small shrine that has been built just off the road. Once we enter the town, we can see the view that would have brought an enormous sense of relief to the travelers, as the most difficult part of their trek back to Kyoto was now over. Upon reaching Hakone, a reconstructed checkpoint can be visited, where centuries ago, travelers and their goods would be inspected. Smugglers transporting firearms were of particular concern, as well as the families of the various daimyo who would try to escape from Edo without permission. Fans of Akira Kurosawa might be reminded of The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail, a film set in the 12th century where a group of travelers must make it through a similar checkpoint. The reconstructed checkpoint has various displays, including weapons used by the soldiers manning the checkpoint, as well as their living areas. A tower on top of a hill has also been reconstructed, which provides a commanding view of the area. From here, the old road would have continued a few hundred kilometers to Kyoto, but Hakone is where my journey ended. The area is easily reachable by train from Tokyo, and I highly recommend visiting if you can. On a clear day, there's a great view of Mount Fuji, but it can be very foggy during the summer. The best time of the year to catch a glimpse of Mount Fuji is from November to February. There are also a bunch of other attractions in Hakone, such as a scenic pirate cruise that ferries you across the lake, cable cars that bring you over a volcano, where you can see active sulfur vents and even eat the famous black eggs of owakudani that are boiled in the sulfur springs of the volcano. The name owakudani means Great Boiling Valley, and of course there are a ton of hotels with natural hot springs. Interest in the Tokaido and the works of Hiroshige has persisted to the present day in both Japan and the West. You might see his woodblock prints hanging on restaurant walls or even in traveling museum exhibits. Recently, the Great Road has inspired a board game of the same name, where the goal is to have the nicest trip by enjoying the spectacular views, eating delicious food, and buying souvenirs. And of course, the great artist himself is a playable character. If you've enjoyed watching this video and you'd like to see more, then please consider subscribing and activating notifications. Thank you for watching.